Assalamu alaikum, family. You're tuned into the Sajdah Wendy Muhammad YouTube channel, also known as the Sajdah channel. And this morning, I'm going to do a little bit of reflection on Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. in light of the national federal holiday that we are celebrating here today. So with that, we're going to take a few minutes, look at a clip from one of his very famous speeches, and I'm going to come back and just give my reflections on it and share, and hopefully it will be inspirational to each and every one of you. We'll see you in a few. Be a friend and tell a friend.
O Allah, guide me among those whom Thou hast guided aright, and preserve me among those whom Thou hast preserved, and befriend me among those whom Thou hast befriended. Bless me in whatsoever Thou dost grant me, and deliver me from the evil of what Thou hast judged. Surely Thou judgest, and none can judge against Thee. And he whom Thou befriendest is not disgraced. Blessed art Thou, O Lord, and exalted be Thee above what they set up besides Thee. I bear witness, nothing deserves to be served besides Thee. And I bear witness that Muhammad is Thy servant and apostle. Amen.
The Honorable Elijah Muhammad, who in my judgment is the master historian, taught us that of all our studies, history is the most attractive, and it is best qualified to reward the researcher. History is most attractive. Why should history be most attractive? Because history is the recorded time of the human family in its struggle to overcome obstacles. There is no life that is without struggle. The Holy Quran teaches us that man, meaning man and woman, is made to face difficulties. And after difficulty comes ease. But it is history that guides us through difficulty. For if you know how people who had difficulty yesterday got through, and if your difficulty is somewhat similar, then today we also can get through if we follow the guidance of history. This is why Carter G. Woodson and many of our black giants fought for black people to know our history. Because in not knowing our history, we don't have a guide. And without a guide, we are lost. No wonder the Bible...
Assalamu alaikum, family. Peace and blessings to you. Welcome to the Sajdah channel. We're reflecting today on the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. I am so fascinated by the connection and the bond that was formed between Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. and the Honorable Elijah Muhammad right at the Honorable Elijah Muhammad House Museum at 4847 South Woodlawn Avenue. And we are working very diligently to get information about those conversations. But I think it's important that we study people like Dr. King. The focus today of the show is on Dr. King. I wanted to bring that reference to the house because there was a meeting there and a lot of people talk about it. And there's a letter that was written. And that's not necessarily my focus today. My focus today is to get us to tap into the courage that someone like Dr. King had to exhibit and had to have as part of his everyday life in order to do what he did. He talked about how in order to be free, you had to lose your fear of death. And for many of us in our generation, not only do we have the fear of death that we're contending with, but we have the fear of loss of a position in society, loss of how somebody's going to see us or think of us. And we limit ourselves to a certain number of ways in which to do things, which mean that, we can't associate with certain people. We can't speak up. We can't say certain things. And we're raising children who are protesting in a silent way, but they're not speaking up and using their voice to protest. And so I honor Dr. King in that way, and the many others. And specifically, again, we're talking today about Dr. King because of his willingness to step up. When the NAACP chose him as the speaker for the March on Washington, and even as the speaker around the bus boycotts in 1955, it was a lot happening in 1955. That happened to be the year that the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan came into the Nation of Islam. It happened to be the year that our young brother Emmett Till was brutally murdered down in Mississippi. It happened to be the year that Rosa Parks, among many others, had refused to go to the back of the bus. So it was a year, a hotbed type of year. They were dealing with the Bull Connors and all of that stuff happening. And so most people were watching the revolution from home on their couch. They talk a good game. Yeah, 1955, this and this was happening. But how many people stood up and stood in front of the very people that were terrorizing them? How many people were bold enough to say, I'll do the speech, I'll go, knowing that their lives were at risk? How many people? It's just like today, it's easy to talk stuff from the couch. But how many people are out there organizing, trying to help people gain rights, civil rights, human rights, in the face of lynchings and murders and terror mobs that were ravaging our communities and our neighborhoods? It was nothing to know somebody who was just lynched or murdered. People had parents. Malcolm X's father was tied to a railroad tracks and murdered by a terrorist mob. So to face that, and whether you agree with his violent or nonviolent approach or not, but to say, listen, I'm going to even stand in front of you all and say, let's not meet violence with violence because we can't win. I'm also going to stand in front of them and tell them how they're wrong. Took a lot of courage. Most of us won't even stand up if something happened to us. We'll stand up and talk smack to our other Black brothers and sisters. But will we stand up and put together an intelligent argument to fight against what was happening in this country during that time and what had been happening after we were kidnapped and brought here? Just a very, very brave soul. You know how courageous it is to stand in front of a vicious person on the Pettit Bridge crossing, and you're met with a mob of people with their intentions is to kill you, to say, I'm going to kneel down and pray. Now, again, you may not agree with that, but it took a lot of courage. And so what I want us to pull from this today is the emotion and the courage that it took to do the things and stand in the face of the things that Dr. King actually did. To say the things that he said were things you just didn't say as a Black person. Again, they pit us against each other. You had Malcolm versus Martin. You know, everybody fighting for the same cause, different ways in which they thought to go about doing it. But when the Honorable Elijah Muhammad sat down with the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King, they came to an understanding. And you could see in the pictures, there was some listening. And then you could see in Dr. King's subsequent speeches, the shift in the way that he began presenting things. It wasn't shortly after that meeting that he was murdered. Courage, intellect. He was a brilliant person, graduated from high school at the age of 15, went to Morehouse College, got a doctorate in a seminary in religious studies. Powerful person that could have said, you know what, I'm going to use my oratory skills and try to figure out how to go get myself into corporate America, go get with some of them good white folks that was doing all this stuff to us and see if I can just get me a job. See what I could do. But instead, he took that education and gave it back to the community, to a community where everybody did not see things the way he saw things. Everybody did not agree to his approach. He was willing to face the vicious and the death and the rumors that we hurled at him, as well as the terrorism that they so readily face, being firebombed. This happened to all of them back then. The Honorable Elijah Muhammad, incredible amount of courage. It took a lot of courage just to get on the train and come up here from the South in the midst of all that terror. How many stories have you read about the Great Migration where those on the train said that as they rode the train through the country, they would look over and see Black bodies swinging? That's what inspired Billie Holiday to remake that song, Strange Fruit. This is a terror that in many cases is unmatched, because what happens today is there's police brutalities, there's murders, but unlike with Mike Brown, we don't have to just look at the body there, sitting there for hours, days, till the stench of the death fills the whole area. But you got children watching this. You got women watching this. You got men and women watching this who say, you know what, I refuse to go to the back of the bus. I refuse to let you treat me like this. Courage. So let's take a look at this short excerpt from one of his speeches. I'm not a Dr. King expert, but I know him pretty well because I studied him quite a bit in high school. Thanks to my mother on that. They all had guts. Yes, Profound Properties talked about Frederick Douglass, and just a lot of guts, a lot to be able to stand up against that. But let's take a look at this, and let's think specifically about Dr. King. I want you to think about what he could have been thinking about. He had a wife and children, beautiful wife, beautiful children, but kept going. What was in her mind? What was her mindset? I can't wait till Byron Allen is able to release the movie based on the rights that she gave to him. Because going into that mindset is that part of history that is so very important, so that we learn from it, so that we can gain insight from it, and so that we can stand up in the face of all that we are facing. But oftentimes when we don't see those things and we're met with our own fears, it's easy to go, no, I ain't going down there hanging with them Muslims because I don't want to lose my job, or I ain't going to say nothing because I don't want to get arrested, or you know what, I ain't going to say nothing. It's easy to do that, but they didn't. They didn't do that. Let's look at it. Let's check this out.
All we say to America is be true to what you said on paper. If I lived in China or even Russia or any totalitarian country, maybe I could understand some of these illegal injunctions. Maybe I could understand the denial of certain basic First Amendment privileges because they haven't committed themselves to that over there. But somewhere I read of the freedom of assembly. Somewhere I read of the freedom of speech. Somewhere I read of the freedom of press. Somewhere I read that the greatness of America is the right to protest far right. And so just as I say we aren't going to let any dogs or water hoses turn us around, we aren't going to let any injunction turn us around. Well, I don't know what will happen now. We've got some difficult days ahead. But it really doesn't matter with me now, because I've been to the mountaintop. I don't mind. Like anybody, I would like to live a long life. Longevity has its place. But I'm not concerned about that now. I just want to do God's will. And He's allowed me to go up to the mountain. And I've looked over and I've seen the promised land. I may not get there with you, but I want you to know tonight that we as a people will get to the promised land. So I'm happy tonight. I'm not worried about anything. I'm not fearing any man. Mine eyes have seen the glory of the coming of the Lord.
That was so powerful. So very powerful. It's one of my favorites. He just wants to do God's will. And being blinded by anything else other than God's will is really a gift. Because when you say I just want to do God's will, not within the confines of what you want. See, a lot of us say, I want to do God's will, but it's within the confines of what we want and the protections and the emotional imprisonment that we put ourselves in, so we won't lose our job, so we won't lose our home, so we won't lose this or that. He's saying, I'm going to do God's will, and I'm willing to risk death, freedom, even my family, to do God's will. Beautiful, beautiful, beautiful person. Absolutely amazing. And I'm so grateful for the example of someone like Dr. King. And I'm encouraging us to look at that example, because so many of us are so scared. We're so caught up in whatever dogma that we believe in, that when the Honorable Elijah Muhammad said, stop looking around waiting for somebody else to do good, you do your part. That sounds so simple today. But it's very powerful when he said that in the 60s. And in fact, to me, it's still powerful today. But that's what we're doing. We're looking around. We're waiting for somebody else. We're watching the television. What they going to do? What's the election going to do? What's happening? But what actually are we doing within our circle? How many people are we supporting? How many people are we helping? How many people are we encouraging? Most of us don't do any of that. We sit at home in front of our television, on the phone. We talk stuff, but when's the last time we actually said, and I've done this before, I'm going to take the day. I think it was on a snow day one time I did it. I'm going to take the day and I'm going to take time today and I'm going to send out 50 messages of encouragement to people and I'm going to make 10 phone calls. I don't want anything. I just want to encourage them. I'm not going to control the conversation. I'm not going to jump in and tell my stories. I just want them to know that they matter. And that's what I'm going to give today. And so practicing how to remove yourself from things. See, a lot of us wonder why nobody talks to us, why nobody reaches out to us, why nobody really kicks it with us. It's because everything's all about us. But when we learn to remove ourselves, it takes courage to do that, because somehow we think that, well, no, because our self is so fragile that we think by removing ourselves from the conversation that we're going to be erased, that somebody's going to forget about us, that somebody ain't going to listen to us. We're so afraid that somebody's going to forget about us. We don't have the courage to be of service, but yet remove ourselves. It's all about who got there first, who did it first, who said it first, who showed who what. Why not be of service and have faith in the act and the outcome and do God's will? That is the example, or one of the many examples of Dr. King. Many examples of Dr. King. So I'm not going to be too long today. I have another short speech of his that I'd like to play. I really want you guys to listen to. It's not very popular. It is one that he gave. It's an interview that was about 11 months before his assassination, before he was murdered, 11 months before that. And you could see some of the shift in his philosophy and in his mindset and where he was going with the Poor People's Campaign that was on the verge of being a very powerful, united event. Okay. So let's do that. Let's check that out. And I just want you to listen and reflect. Let's pull that up and share that one. There we go.
Speed, Civil Rights, King, Vanoka, roll 20, sound 36. Sandy.
Dr. King, this church is as good a place as any to go back over your commitment to the civil rights movement. When you went out from here into university and then you went to Montgomery, Alabama and started the bus boycotts there, what was the philosophy of the civil rights movement as you saw it then, more than 10 years ago?
Well, I would say then the philosophy was that we must go all out to use legal and nonviolent methods to gain full citizenship rights for the Negro people of our country. Now, of course, that particular struggle and that philosophy centered on breaking down all of the barriers of legal segregation. So I would say that in that period, the basic thrust for the gaining of citizenship rights for Negroes
was to end the humiliation surrounding the whole system of legal segregation.
Dr. King, was there something peculiar to the place where you started and the kind of people you attracted? I mean by that, there was a strong attachment on the part of your parishioners in Montgomery to the church. They were older people, weren't they?
Yes, I would say by and large they were older people who participated in the boycott because they were the ones using the bus more than anybody else. And Montgomery was a community predominantly church-centered, so that it was very easy to get to the vast majority of Negroes because they were in some way connected with a church in the community.
Was there, in addition to your commitment to the idea of nonviolence, wasn't it also the only thing you could do, the white community having the monopoly on violence, that if you had tried violence, they would have met it with violence? It was the only device open to you, wasn't it?
Well, I'll put it another way, that morally, I was led to nonviolence because I felt that it was the best moral way to deal with the problem. We were seeking to establish a just society. And it was my feeling then, and it is my feeling now, that violence is certainly much more socially destructive, and it creates many more social problems than it solves. So I was led to nonviolence for deep moral reasons. Now, there is no doubt about the fact that in our struggle in Montgomery and all over the United States for that matter, nonviolence is also practically sound. It would just be impractical for the Negro to turn to violence. He has neither the instruments nor the techniques of violence. We are about 10 or 11% of the total population of the nation, and I would say we're about 1/10 of the firepower. So it would just be totally impractical and unwise and unrealistic for the Negro to think of violence. Well, I saw this in the beginning in Montgomery, but this wasn't the basic reason that I turned to nonviolence and that I believed in it as a philosophy. I turned to it because I felt that it was the morally excellent way to deal with the problem of racial injustice in our country.
Is there something about nonviolence that made it, and I use that in the past tense, that made it more useful among Southern Negroes than the ghetto Negroes of the North?
I wouldn't say there's anything that makes it more useful to Southern Negroes. I think it is true that we've had more nonviolent movements in the South because the problem for many years was more crystallized and, in a sense, more visible in the South. We didn't have many civil rights activities on a massive scale in the North until 3 or 4 years ago. So I would say that we just haven't had a chance to experiment on a broad scale with nonviolence in the Northern ghetto. I have the feeling that nonviolence is as applicable and workable in the Northern ghetto as it is in the South. There's a larger job there. The frustrations at points are much deeper. The bitterness is deeper. And I think that's because in the South, we can see pockets of progress here and there. We've really made some strides that are very visible, and every Southern Negro knows that he can do things today that he couldn't do 4 or 5 years ago. Wherein in the North, the Negro sees only retrogress, and he doesn't find it as easy to get his vision centered on his target, the target of opposition, as he does in the South. Consequently, this is made for despair and at many points cynicism, a feeling that you can't win. And it simply means that we've got to develop in the North a massive job of organization and mobilizing forces and resources to deal with the problem in the urban ghettos of the North, just as we've done it in the South.
Well, in the South, particularly in Alabama, you had visible villains: Jim Clark, Bull Connor, cattle prods, police dogs. But in the North, you don't have those visible villains. Isn't it hard to get your people aroused and directed at something that isn't visible?
Well, that's exactly right. And this is what I was saying when I said it's harder to see a target. In the South, in the nonviolent movement, we were aided always, on the whole, by the brutality of our opponent. It isn't the same way in the North. The other thing is that you don't have legal segregation in the North as you do in the South. So it is much more difficult to get people to see exactly what you're doing, but it isn't an impossible job. It's a hard, it's a tedious job at times to get people to be aroused from their apathetic slumbers, but I still feel that Negroes in the North can be motivated just as they were motivated in the South. And I think as time goes on with the growing economic deprivation in the Negro community, it will even be easier because people will come to see that not only is something wrong in general, but something is wrong in particular in their own economic and housing situation.
What is it? I mean, how do you find it? It's very subtle in the North, is it not?
It's subtle, but it's becoming much more visible. Anybody can see that the schools are more segregated in the North today than they were in 1954 when the Supreme Court rendered its decision declaring segregation unconstitutional. Anybody can look around the ghetto and see that ghetto schools are predominantly segregated and devoid of quality. Anyone who moves through a major ghetto of our country will see the housing conditions. People don't have to be reminded that they are forced to live in slums in many instances, and they're often rat-infested, vermin-filled slums. And it isn't too hard to see the exploitation that the Negro confronts in the ghetto, where he is forced to pay more for less and constantly trying to make ends meet, but because of either no job as a result of unemployment or a job that is so economically unprofitable that the person can't make ends meet. And I think they see all of these things, and more they're coming to see them, because before the people of the North were looking to the South and they supported the struggles of the South. Now they're coming to see that their problems are very real and they've got to organize to grapple with them.
Was there something hypocritical about the fact that the South existed and the North could point the finger? And then when the Civil Rights Acts were passed in the early 60s, you couldn't point the finger anymore?
Well, it's not about the hypocrisy of large segments of the nation on the whole question of racial equality. I think the best example is that many of the senators from the North and the West, and congressmen generally, who voted for civil rights legislation in '64 and even '65 with the Voting Rights Bill, refused last year to vote for civil rights legislation because it dealt with an issue applicable to the North, the whole housing question. And this, it seems to me, was the greatest expression of the hypocrisy of many of our citizens and many of the senators and congressmen of the North.
But isn't that part of the dilemma now? That people knew that Negroes were being denied what was guaranteed to them by the Constitution, by the fact that they were citizens of this country. Then when they were given those rights, do you feel the white community said, well, we've given them all that we have, now it's up to them?
Well, I think the dilemma is much deeper, and I think one during this period of transition has to be very honest with America. And honesty impels me to admit that America has broad racist elements still alive. Racism is still existing in American society in many areas of the society, North and South. And the other thing is that there has never been a single, solid, determined commitment of large segments of white America on the whole question of racial equality. I think we have to see that vacillation has always existed, ambivalence has always existed, and this to me is the so-called white backlash. It's merely a new name for an old phenomenon. I see the white backlash as a continuation of the same ambivalence and vacillation of white America on the whole question of racial justice that has existed since the founding of our nation. I think the other thing that we must see at this time is that many of the people who supported us in Selma, in Birmingham, were really outraged about the extremist behavior toward Negroes. But they were not at that moment, and they are not now, committed to genuine equality for Negroes. It's much easier to integrate a lunch counter than it is to guarantee an annual income, for instance, to get rid of poverty for Negroes and all poor people. It's much easier to integrate a bus than it is to make genuine integration a reality and quality education a reality in our schools. It's much easier to integrate even a public park than it is to get rid of slums. And I think we are in a new era, a new phase of the struggle, where we have moved from a struggle for decency, which characterized our struggle for 10 or 12 years, to a struggle for genuine equality. And this is where we are getting the resistance, because there was never any intention to go this far. People were reacting to Bull Connor and to Jim Clark rather than acting in good faith for the realization of genuine equality.
Do you think white people in this country, and I'm talking about non-segregationists, people devoid or thinking they're devoid of racism, do you have any idea of what they want the Negro to be in America?
Well, it depends on the level that we are talking here, because I think you have to make a distinction between the people who are genuinely and absolutely committed in the white community on the question of racial equality. And I must confess that I think they're in a very small minority. I think the vast majority of white Americans will go but so far. It's a kind of installment plan for equality, and they are always looking for an excuse to go but so far.
Why are they looking for the excuse? What is it about the Negro? I mean, every other group that came as an immigrant somehow, not easily, but somehow got around. Is it just the fact that Negroes are black?
That's a part of it, and that grows out of something else. You can't thingify anything without depersonalizing that something. If you use something as a means to an end, at that moment you make it a thing and you depersonalize it. The fact is that the Negro was a slave in this country for 244 years. That was a willful thing that was done. The Negro was brought here and changed, treated in very inhuman fashion. And this led to the thingification of the Negro. So he was not looked upon as a person. He was not looked upon as a human being with the same status and worth as other human beings. And the other thing is that human beings cannot continue to do wrong without eventually rationalizing that wrong. So slavery was justified morally, biologically, theoretically, scientifically, everything else. And it seems to me that white America must see that no other ethnic group has been a slave on American soil. That is one thing that other immigrant groups haven't had to face. The other thing is that the color became a stigma. American society made the Negro's color a stigma, and that can never be over. So I think these things are absolutely necessary. The other thing is that America freed the slaves in 1863 through the Emancipation Proclamation of Abraham Lincoln, but gave the slaves no land or nothing in reality, and as a matter of fact, to get started on. At the same time, America was giving away millions of acres of land in the West and the Midwest, which meant that there was a willingness to give the white peasants from Europe an economic base. and yet it refused to give its black peasants from Africa who came here involuntarily in chains and had worked free for 244 years any kind of economic base. And so emancipation for the Negro was really freedom to hunger. It was freedom to the winds and rains of heaven. It was freedom without food to eat or land to cultivate, and therefore it was freedom and famine at the same time. And when white Americans tell the Negro to lift himself by his own bootstraps, they don't look over the legacy of slavery and segregation. I believe we ought to do all we can and seek to lift ourselves by our own bootstraps, but it's a cruel jest to say to a bootless man that he ought to lift himself by his own bootstraps. And many Negroes, by the thousands and millions, have been left bootless as a result of all of these years of oppression and as a result of a society that deliberately made his color worthless and degrading.
Apart from wanting to live better, which all of us want to do, to raise one's children in a better way, to be better, does the Negro in America know what he wants to be?
I'm convinced that almost every Negro in this country, other than those who have been so scarred by the system that they've become pathological in the process, and we all have to battle with pathology, and nobody really knows what it means to be a Negro unless one can really experience it. And I know we all have to battle with this constant drain of a feeling of nobodiness. But in spite of this, I think the vast majority of Negroes in this country know that they want to be people, they want to be men, they want equality, period. It just boils down to that. And we haven't been able to be people. We haven't been men because of all of the conditions that we've lived with and the syndrome of deprivation surrounding conditions, whether it's in housing, in the economic area, or in schools, or in the vicious credit practices that we face in the ghetto, and all of the problems of closed doors and constant defeats. But in spite of all this, I think we all know basically that we want to be men. We want to be persons judged not on the basis of the color of our skin, but on the basis of the content of our character.
But you know that many young Negroes don't want anything that smacks of the American white middle class. But do they want something that smacks of whatever is the black middle class, or do they just not want bourgeois values, which after all are the basis of this democracy?
Well, I think we have to see what they are saying. I would be the first to agree that integration does not mean giving up everything that has an Afro-American taint, so to speak, a background. I think there are certain unique things within any culture and certain cultural patterns that when you get to the process of amalgamation can really lift the whole culture. And it seems to me that integration at its best is the opportunity to participate in the beauty of diversity. I think the other thing that we've got to see is that these young people are saying that there must be a revolution of values in our country. As Jimmy Baldwin said on one occasion, what advantage is there in being integrated into a burning house? And I feel that there is a need for a revolution of values in America, because some of the values that presently exist are certainly out of line with the values and the idealistic structure that brought our nation into being. Unfortunately, we haven't been true to these ideals, and many of the values of so-called white middle-class society are values that need to be reviewed and re-evaluated, and in a real sense, they need to be changed. So I think the young people in the Negro community who are raising these questions are raising some very profound questions about our total society. In other words, they are saying that there must be a restructuring of the architecture of our society where values are concerned. And with this, I would agree with. So in the quest for integration, I think we can offer our whole nation something, because there are three evils in our nation. It's not only racism, but economic exploitation of poverty would be one, and then militarism. And I think in a sense, and in a very real sense, these three are tied inextricably together, and we aren't going to get rid of one without getting rid of the other.
When you stood on the Lincoln Memorial that day in August '63, and you said, "I had a dream," did that dream envision that you could see a war in Asia preventing the federal government doing for the Negroes, preventing the society doing for the Negroes that which you think had to be done?
No, I didn't envision that then. I must confess that that period was a great period of hope for me. And I'm sure for many others all across the nation, many of the Negroes who had about lost hope, saw a solid decade of progress in the South. And in 1954, which was, 64, 1963, 9 years after the Supreme Court's decision to be in the March on Washington, meant a great deal. It was a high moment, a great watershed moment. But I must confess that that dream that I had that day has at many points turned into a nightmare. Now, I'm not one to lose hope. I keep on hoping. I still have faith in the future. But I've had to analyze many things over the last few years, and I would say over the last few months. I've gone through a lot of soul-searching and agonizing moments. And I've come to see that we have many more difficult days ahead, and some of the old optimism was a little superficial, and now it must be tempered with a solid realism. And I think the realistic fact is that we still have a long, long way to go, and that we are involved in a war on Asian soil, which, if not checked and stopped, can poison the very soul of our nation.
Dr. King, even if there had not been a war in Asia, would you still not have had this nightmare insofar as the Negro movement for equality then touched on two things that the white community holds sacred: their children and their property?
Oh, I have no doubt that we would have encountered great difficulties, great problems of resistance if the war had not been in existence. So that I'm not going to say that all of our problems will be solved if the war in Vietnam is ended. But I do say that the war makes it infinitely more difficult to deal with these problems. When a nation becomes obsessed with the guns of war, it loses its social perspective, and programs of social uplift suffer. This is just a fact of history, so that we do face many more difficulties as a result of the war. It's much more difficult to really arouse a conscience during a time of war. I noticed the other day, some weeks ago, a Negro was shot down in Chicago, and it was a clear case of police brutality. That was on page 30 of the paper, but on page 1 at the top was 780 Viet Cong killed. That is something about a war like this that makes people insensitive. It dulls the conscience. It strengthens the forces of reaction, and it brings into being bitterness and hatred and violence. And it strengthened the military-industrial complex of our country, and it's made our job much more difficult, because I think we can go along with some programs, if we didn't have this war on our hands, that would cause people to adjust to new developments, just as they did in the South. They said they'd never ride the bus with us, blood would flow in the streets, they wouldn't go to school, and all of these things. But when people came to see that they had to do it because the law insisted, they finally adjusted. And I think white people all over this country will adjust once the nation makes it clear that in schools and housing, we've got to learn to live together as brothers. I think the biggest problem now is that we got our gains over the last 12 years at bargain rates, so to speak. Didn't cost the nation anything. In fact, it helped the economic side of the nation to integrate lunch counters and public accommodations. It didn't cost the nation anything to get the right to vote established. And now we are confronting issues that cannot be solved without costing the nation billions of dollars. Now, I think this is where we're getting our greatest resistance. They may put it on many other things, but we can't get rid of slums and poverty without it costing the nation something.
Very, very powerful.
Hey, NBC News viewers, thanks for checking out.
Very powerful conversation. Sorry about that. I hope you all, wow. I see somebody got a big long message here on there. You guys can go through that. I hope it's friendly. Okay. Wow. We learned a new word, right? The thingification, which is so powerful. I'm not going to say much behind that because I think that this is worth us going back and reviewing and dissecting some of the things that he said. That's right, Aletha. He just dropped the mic. Powerful. I don't have nothing else to say other than to let you all know, go to the website if you're interested in participating and celebrating Savior's Day with us. You can do that at sajdahhouse.com. Go on there. There's different things that you can do. We got a few tours scheduled. You do have to book them. They are private. We're not necessarily open to the public, so it's for us during Savior's Day. And then we've got 2 receptions that we're going to do. One for our coin holders and our sponsors, and another one for where we're going to be celebrating Black Muslim businesses. So we encourage you to come out. Let's see what other comments we got here. We got the heart, Sister Aletha, Servant Nasir. Yeah, listen, that's so powerful to me. I've actually listened to that probably 20 or 30 times, or if not more. And I'm actually in the mind right now to go back and listen to it, because this time the thingification of the Negro is what jumped out. Very, very powerful stuff. So yes, go to sajdahhouse.com if you're interested in celebrating Savior's Day with us. There's ways in which you can celebrate. We're excited to have you and can't wait to see you. Welcome to Chicago. That's what we're going to tell you. Follow us on Instagram, Sajdah House. This is where we'll put a lot of different announcements and things like that. And we're just celebrating our holiday coming up February 21st, 22nd, and 23rd. All right, family. Love you all. Don't forget to use the QR code. Get your commemorative Elijah Coin sweatshirt and some other cool items there from our virtual gift shop. Remember, it's not personal, it's vibrational. And we'll see you all soon, inshallah.